thank you very much for being here today again, like every Thursday. And thank you especially to Fiona, which I'm so glad to have you in our talk. It's just feeling like somebody, friend, who has achieved so much and opened the doors for so many women around the world. So I really appreciate this kind of entrepreneurship spirit that you have, and that social, very strong social aspect that you bring to the table. So thank you so much, Fiona, for being today with us. People, you have seen the bio, impressive, of Fiona. I don't want to spend too much time on that, but she is a colleague of the Marshall Goldsmith 100 coaches. She has been, well, I think she created the Woman Innovation Leadership Development Network, which is a great forum. It's one of the largest I've seen. She teaches, she coaches, I don't know, she entrepreneurs. I don't know where you find the time, Fiona, but I want to learn from you. And so thank you for being with us. I'll explain a bit the process. There's about 15-20 minutes where you can share your views, your thoughts, your latest thinking. And then you'll see this community is very global. We have people from South America, US, India, Pakistan, and they are all very eager to make questions. So you'll see, time will fly. Thank you, Fiona. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Antonio. This is exciting to be with you all. I see that people are joining from around the world, so I feel very much at home in this global community. Antonio, thanks for organizing it and including me today.
Thank you. Where are you calling, Fiona, from?
So I'm calling from rural Quebec, Canada. This is where I grew up, in a francophone community in otherwise English-speaking Canada. These days, I am married to an American, and I usually am in Washington, D.C. Yeah. But one of the silver linings of these unusual times that we were just talking about is that, of course, we can work from anywhere. And so I'm back next to a lake in a rural area, which is a great respite from COVID. It looks a little bit like DJ's background without the snow.
Nice. Do you want to, Fiona, tell a bit? I prefer that people tell their story. Can you tell us a bit your career, the highlights, and first start with that.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Antonio. Well, I feel like, you know, where I currently am sort of began is that I started my first social enterprise when I was 26 years old. I had been working in South Africa in the post-apartheid era at the time that Nelson Mandela was president. And I had the experience of being in that country when it was rapidly changing, and was part of it both amongst adults as well as young people. And I was part of a team that developed very experiential, hands-on training materials that could be used in schools to help teachers who had no entrepreneurship background teach critical business skills and entrepreneurship skills to young people. And I also had the experience of working in the township areas, in the slum areas around some of the big cities in South Africa, where there was incredibly hardworking adults who were also earning such small amounts of money that they were really living day to day, had low security, and not always the ability to put food on the table. And of course, paying school fees to keep their children in school was always a challenge. So I felt that that was a unique opportunity to both be working with unemployed adults who were working in the informal sector to try and get enough money together to live day to day. And at the same time had this opportunity to think about how to prevent low-income South African children and youth, avoid them being in a situation where they would become those unemployed, unskilled adults who had little ways of earning an income. Wow. And some of my big takeaways, so I started my first social enterprise in my mid-20s, seeing the power of marrying experiential learning with entrepreneurship concepts and education. And that if you could meet people where they were at, you could very quickly build more sophisticated business skills. For example, amongst that adult population, a few additional business skills like understanding about the risks of selling on credit, stronger negotiation skills, thinking about managing cash flow, both about spending, savings, and sort of investing in the business, was able to support adults to be able to very quickly double or triple the revenues that they were making from their microenterprise activities. And I'm so grateful for that time in South Africa, not only because it gave me the DNA to start my first global entrepreneurship education company, which led me to work in 50 different countries over a 20-year career, but it also left me deeply understanding that it's important to meet people where they at on the skill building journey that they are on. That my personal philosophy is that everybody is capable of incredible things given the opportunity. And for me, it's that given the opportunity piece that has really driven the rest of my career. So today I teach entrepreneurship at the Georgetown McDonough School of Business. So I teach undergraduates entrepreneurship. I also run a leadership clinic for the MBAs there. And I feel like the lessons that I learned working with low-income populations in different markets around the world sort of serves me today and how I'm working with obviously a highly literate, highly accomplished population. Although that said, we have a lot of university students who are the first in their families to go to university. So both accomplished as well as young people coming from quite diverse backgrounds. And the other work that I'm doing now that you mentioned, Antonio, is that coming out of it, my 20-year career in the global development sector, so working in emerging economies, specifically in community economic development, helping people get ahead economically, I noted that even though that is very much a do-good sector, right? Helping people in developing economies have better health, develop agricultural practices that is resistant to climate change, working on different economic issues, that while this is sort of a do-good sector, our sector itself could stand to be improved in the areas of diversity, the leadership in a lot of the for-profits and not-for-profits who work in global development, largely white, largely from middle class, upper middle class backgrounds, even the representation that one might often see in the Fortune 500 companies. So when we benchmark the work of ourselves in the global development sector, we could be doing a lot better, period. And we could certainly also be doing better if we see all the diversity and inclusion initiatives that we have going in the global development sector. And Antonio, I wonder if I might share my screen just to share some of the learning journey that I've been on the last couple of years about how I'm able to use, let's call it the platform, the influence, the network that I have in order to create what I'm doing now, which is more opportunities for all women to have leadership positions. I feel like it's topical for our time. And I think some of the messages that are probably we share with others and that we hold to be true to ourselves about needing to be humble so that we can learn to admit where we have room for improvement. I'd like to just kind of share some of the humility and humble moments I've had in the last couple of years on this current journey I'm on this current work that I'm doing to advance women's leadership in the global development sector. Would that be possible, Antonio?
Of course, Fiona, I'd love to see that. I'm sure everybody, I think you can already share your screen. Let's see if that works.
Okay, fantastic. Let me just cue it up here.
While you bring it up, I just wanted to share a reflection, Fiona. I think the future of the world depends on women.
Oh, yes, please.
I think we want more women leaders did you see some of the best countries through this crisis have been led by women. So I was thinking maybe it's the time to have that more and more. And and just was a reflection that maybe connects to some of your points later on.
Well, thank you for saying that. I feel like the world, our communities really need male allies. And hearing you say that, I think fills me with sort of a sense of joy, because it's hugely important. So thank you for that, Antonio. For that, whoops. So in 2018, as I say, I had come off, I had just finished a 20-year career of founding and then being the CEO in a global development company that did work in over 40 countries. And when I sold my company, I reflected that my real interest was on supporting more women and more diverse people overall to be able to have leadership positions in the global development sector. So I decided to launch a forum to advance women in the global development sector. And there was two very important pieces of feedback that I got at that forum. So I'm just going to share a couple of pictures. The first is here, you can see that it's, like this is a very professional conference going community. So you've been to a lot of conferences, and this will be familiar to you that you see this picture of people sitting around a round table discussion. And you see the number 24 on that table. We had 24 different round tables of, about 10 or 12 people by an expert or someone interested in a topic. And the session that I chose to sit with was actually called Coming Out of the Shadows, Being a Woman of Color in the Global Development Sector. And I'll just go to the next slide. And these are the women. The woman holding the sign in the middle is the one who had suggested this topic. As the curator, I had accepted it onto the agenda. And I was curious about this topic, like out of the shadows. That felt like very dramatic to me, creating space for women leaders to thrive, in the global development sector. And I was curious, and so I sat down at this round table, and the only other women sitting there were these 6 women that you see in the photo. And they were talking about the kind of microaggressions that they face every day, how much time they spent thinking about how to disagree with a white colleague in a meeting so that they wouldn't be seen as aggressive Black women. Talking about the pay equity that they knew was taking place in their organizations. And they were both talking about it matter-of-factly, but also talking about it with kind of almost a resigned frustration and kind of sadness around it. And when I sat down with them, they were about probably 10 minutes into their discussion. They didn't miss a beat. They just, they kept talking. And I felt like it was really hearing this discussion take place. I also, looked around this 400-person event and thought, wondered, did the other white women in this room know that our African-American colleagues feel this way? And as I say, I had spent 20 years working in this sector. And I thought, as a focus group of one, I thought, I am sure I'm not the only person in this room who has no idea about this load that our African-American colleagues are experiencing, as well as colleagues who are not necessarily American, but might be immigrants from another country now in the U.S. workforce, working in this sector. This was a very enlightening 45 minutes, because I felt, as the convener of an event to advance women's leadership in the global development sector, I had a responsibility, I had an opportunity to raise the voices and to bring these kinds of messages and realities like I had heard from this roundtable. I got a second important piece of feedback. This image I'm now showing on the screen is of women who are CEOs and executive directors of some of the leading North American-based for-profits and not-for-profits that work in the global development sector. The session was called View from the Top, and the goal was to hear from the top leaders, top influences in our sector on what they were seeing around, women's leadership. And I was criticized afterwards for that there was no people of color here. And my first reaction was, well, I was inviting top leaders. There were no top leaders who were women of color. So this is who they are, and this is what the panel was about. But then once I had gotten over my initial defensive reaction, I had the chance to convene this similar panel on this kind of topic with leaders from our sector in 2019, last year. This is who was on the panel. It took a little bit more work from my side. It took a little bit more of an expansive view to realize that in order to bring in the diversity of viewpoints, I needed to sort of expand who we, my own network, and considering who are the top CEOs and executive directors. And so we can see it's like a very different profile of people. And for sure, this was definitely a more lively panel, and it did a better job of also representing and showcasing what it is that we were wanting to communicate, in this forum, because the visual signals are so critical. So we went from this, to this. And then coming out of that experience that I had the first year, when we had this roundtable and this panel, I was also given the feedback like, Fiona, you did a pretty good job of bringing together a lot of different people to speak. We did have, not on this panel, but we did have women of color, immigrants, people of different backgrounds speaking. But they said, Fiona, women of color were talking at your event, but they weren't talking about the intersectionality of being a woman and being a woman of color, or being a woman and being a minority of another kind. And I said, of course, first reaction was in my own mind, like, wow, I worked so hard, hours and hours, late nights, weekends. My team worked so hard to pull that event together. We had so many different speakers, like 60 speakers. And then again, when I had a moment to sort of take a breath and think about the value and the gift of feedback I was getting, I realized, yeah, you're right. We did have a lot of different people speaking. They were not necessarily representing that intersectionality of being, to represent the experiences that a wide variety of women took. So using my platform, we had a convening asking any person who identified as a woman of color in the global development sector to kind of come together for a 3-hour workshop. We combined it with a happy hour at like a very nice event, venue. And we were able to really surface more of what I had the privilege of hearing sitting with this group of 6 women. We then had 60 women of color sort of surfacing the realities of being, the realities in the day-to-day workforce, and what they wanted to see change. And we shared that information out with all of our speakers last year in 2019. And we saw almost every speaker rise to the challenge of making sure that they were representing the viewpoints of a variety of different women, either by doing that research themselves and bringing it to the event, or by inviting a co-panelist or a co-presenter to ensure that different points of view were being shared. And hands down, it made our event stronger, and hands down, it's helping advance our mission, and hands down, it's the right thing to do. So that's kind of where we've come out, now, is having these new tenets of ensuring multiple viewpoints in all of the convening that we're doing. And just to share very kind of humbly, at times it felt scary, like who was I as a white woman to be convening the voices of African Americans. However, I, as a social entrepreneur, had also created that platform to maybe have the power and the position to do it. So I think it was one of those opportunities to lean in. And I'd love just to kind of kick off a discussion on that, because I imagine that many of you in this community are yourselves kind of leaning into the challenge, and maybe at the same time facing some of those emotions I did around fear, around needing to build allies around me so that I wasn't doing it myself, and sometimes making some missteps. I'll pause there, Antonio. Thanks.
Thank you, Fiona. Very nice setting of and explaining how the evolution that your Congress has moved, and the pictures where, yeah, you don't realize, but actually they were all white, and then you how you turn and pivot towards diversity. And there's no bad intentions, but if you don't pay attention, then we are born with some biases, and it's incredible. Very, very. I'm going to open now. One thing that shocked me in the first picture, Fiona, was that all the women were paying attention to the discussion. There were no mobiles, or which we usually see most of these congresses, but all paying attention.
Well, I think it's a little bit of the right topic at the right time. So just after we had launched the idea of the Congress, we had the Me Too movement gained momentum. And actually in the global development sector, there was a hashtag called Aid2, meaning that the overseas aid community also had an issue with, with sexual harassment and biases. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to pass now the question to Mark Prinsky. He has a dream to train 2 billion kids, empower 2 billion kids. So his question, I'm sure, will be around kids. And then Thomas Valenta, who's calling from Germany, a great friend, an expert on ethics and global citizen. So Mark, can you come up on screen? Where are you calling from? And
I hope I'm on the screen. I'm from I'm in Palo Alto, California. Vous êtes francophone aussi?
Très bien.
Okay. Nice to meet you. I have spoken many times in Quebec, and I love it. The observation that I have is that this is absolutely the right time, and you are doing exactly the right thing in terms of the 50% of the world that is women, and that have been neglected or overlooked or abused, or all the things that you talk about. It turns out that 50% of the world is also kids. The median age of the world is under 25. So I'm wondering whether you include kids, young people, in your definition of diversity when you say an inclusion. And as a corollary to that, do you see any changes in beliefs, especially, which is what I focus on, between the generations, separately from the gender idea? In other words, just older men and women versus younger men and women, or women and men, if you prefer. So there's huge generational changes going on at the same time as all this other stuff is going on, and I'm wondering what your perspective is on that.
Yeah. Mark, thank you so much for your kind of question and for bringing up the consideration about, youth and young people, because as you say, in many countries, the majority of young people are under the age of 25 or, under the age of 18. And in fact, the world population of 1.5 billion young people is the highest youth population our planet has ever had. And getting it right with these young people is going to have a huge impact on the future of our communities, the future of nation states and the planet, because if those young people get the opportunities they need now or don't, there's going to be huge ramifications, over the next 30, 40, 50, 60 years. So right there with you on how important this is.
Let's talk.
So, okay. So in the work that I do around women's leadership, yes, we also take into account the importance of youth voices. And because we are working with professionals who work in the global development sector, we're specifically working with wanting to have the voices of young professionals. So in my mind, there's sort of two young professional cohorts that I think about. There's about the professionals who are coming into the workforce. So for example, who are at the university level. So one of the things we do is have partnerships, and we do significant outreach to a lot of the universities that are sort of like the feeder universities into the global development workforce. And so I'll specifically speak about Georgetown because that's where I have the highest amount of touch with those young people. So for example, Georgetown University School for Foreign Service, a lot of those students are like, it's sort of a pipeline to working in the global development sector. Sometimes it's in diplomacy, like at the US State Department, but it's often at NGOs like CARE, Save the Children, or the for-profit companies that we have in the US who work in this space. And there is huge energy on their part for asking their employers who they're being interviewed by, but also interviewing, to ask about career paths for everybody and asking about some of those questions that can be specific to, you know, women's or particular interest to women's kind of career paths. So I think tapping that coming into that highly desirable coming into the workforce kind of pipeline of talent is really critical. And then there's other women who are in the workforce already and are facing, so what I see is that there's a huge demand from them for leadership skill building. So from everything around like having difficult conversations, right, which I would say is maybe a skill most of us are endlessly working on, because can you ever master having the difficult conversation in every scenario? Ranging from having difficult conversations to how to be a great manager, you know, when you first kind of are managing people, whether that's interns or like 1 or 2 people on your team. And also like a lot of interest in things like personal branding, like how do I set myself up to be someone who is seen as a leader. And I also see that there's a lot of one of the messages they really appreciate is this kind of lead at every level message. So you don't necessarily need to have the authority and the power to be a strong leader in your organization. When women, and I'd say men as well, although I think, you know, women for various you know, reasons of how we're brought up, often we're more in need of like permission, right? We need to kind of be given permission to do things like step in and lead or put up our hands. But I would say young men, women and men are really keen and open to that message of lead at every level. And so then I think the question for us becomes, how can we encourage young people to lead at every level, feel that they have permission to lead, and then that they're given those openings, you know, to lead and fail, and to kind of develop those skills at a young level. And one thing I just want to touch on, Mark, before we go to Thomas's question, is that we started off our work, and I was very intentional about focusing on those who are based in North America. So I'm in DC, we started out as a live forum, so it made sense that we kind of get traction, let's say in my local neighborhood. However, both through intention and through demand, there is young women professionals in emerging economies who are like, yes, me too, right? Like me too, whatever's going on there in DC, helping, you know, young women get on leadership tracks. Those of us working in the project offices or in the country office, you know, in Nairobi, in Bolivia, in Bangkok, like we want that kind of support too. So a silver lining from COVID is that we have moved from being a live event to a virtual event. So October 26th to 28th this year, we are having our kind of 60 speakers and 40 sessions. They're going to take place over time zones that can accommodate the whole world, and topics that speak to women in both the global north and the global south, to be able to advance their leadership skills, connect with others who are. We also have this increased diversity and inclusion piece. So in a nutshell, Mark, yes, young people who are in the workforce and coming into the workforce. And secondly, just remembering for how can we be as inclusive as possible of our younger colleagues in developing countries who may not have the same kind of access or same kind of go get them attitude surrounding them, which we're fortunate to often have in organizations in the global.
Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona. Thank you, Mark. I'm sure Fiona and Mark will reach out to you.
With pleasure, Mark.
How are you? Where are you calling from? Frankfurt?
Antonio, talking to me?
Yes, your
Yes.
question. Where are you calling from?
Well, I'm calling from home, and my home is in Hackenheim, and you won't know it, you know. But it's 80 kilometers west from Frankfurt, yes. It's a nice rural area, so we have plenty of space to go out without violating any distance rules and having a dog with us. So very nice. And we have nice weather too. So thank you, Antonio, for bringing up this topic for the discussion today. I think it's really time to do that, and it's a good time. And thank you, Fiona, for setting the stage and telling us what you are doing. I think it's very interesting.
Thank you.
And maybe we can help you. And maybe, yeah, because we are really enthusiastic about making the world a better place. And that means having respect for each human being. as he is, you know, and not trying to put him into a corner and telling him names. So my question comes out of an email I got this week, along with all other stakeholders of PMI Project Management Institute. You know, this project management thing Antonio was the chairman of, and I am a member of. And Sunil, the CEO of PMI, he reflected on the current ballot that was created to elect new board members for next year. And 6 people are on the ballot and only one of them is female. And he issued his frustration with that fact. So how can it be, you know, that we are conscious in selecting the right people, diversity, and we did a good job in reflecting on the regions of the world, but yeah, we only found one woman in that. And so he was a little bit thinking about, should we maybe introduce some kind of quota? And then the second news from this week was a German court killed a law that was requiring parties to have alternating quotas of men and women on the ballot for the government election. So it was killed because it was deemed not to be fair to the parties. So quotas doesn't seem to be the thing. So my question is, what can we change then to create a better diverse slate of candidates or whatever? And, you know, I thought maybe the criteria are the problem. How we select leaders, how we select people who are in charge of something. Or if it's a country, if it's a CEO position, if it's on the board or whatever. And I think, you know, and it's just a thought, are there any ideas how to make sure that these criteria are not reflecting the biases of the people who are making these criteria? And these people, I know some of them, you know, they are, let's say for a board, they are in the Institute of Directors, they are on the NACT in the US. These are old white Western men in power for some years. And they are making the criteria to select the next old white Western men. And so maybe we should find a way to make them aware of that problem. And you can see the benefits, you know, if you look at the nations who are successful in handling the crisis, these are all led by women, or most of them, you know. And I think there's a research question, you know, can we change this criteria to make it more diverse, the outcome?
Yeah.
Great.
Well, Tom,
Fiona.
great question. Yeah, I mean, great question. And I think in the same way that I was really wanting to acknowledge and lift up Antonio for being a strong male ally, I think we'd all like to offer that to you as well, because raising the question, you're raising the consideration amongst your peer group, and it's the majority, the minority who is doing that. So, you know, great. And I think PMI is very fortunate to have you and have you raising this question. You brought up the criteria, should that change? I think it's very interesting that the research shows in recruitment that when job descriptions talk about sort of use terms that convey a kind of aggression, know-it-all, that women are less likely to apply, right? We know the data that shows if there's a criteria of 10 things that's required to apply, that's suggested to apply, you know, women feel like if they don't have all 10, they're not going to apply. And men who have like 4 or 6, they think they're perfectly suited, like they think they're great, perfect for the job. So we have the data that tells us that this is not true for every male or female. We have the data that shows that women who kind of trend towards perfectionism and thinking that they need to be absolutely qualified are less likely to apply. So I really think you're onto something with the idea of changing the criteria. The second thing is, I'll just go back to a point I mentioned earlier, is that often women need to be asked. So women needed to be invited to apply, to be told they would be great at it and that they should apply. And I was curious, when you look at the job description that was put out, or the position description, and the other accompanying communications, where do you feel that PMI could do better around the language in the position description, who was communicating it, and how it was being communicated?
Well, if that's the question, you know, I think PMI did quite a good job, because with Sunil on board from last year, he really put a focus on that to create a higher slate of diversity in several dimensions. So he really did. And I think the communication was also in that. And I personally encouraged some women, I know, PMI women, to apply for the job, and they did, and they were not selected. So I still think it basically, this kind of resulting slate came out of the nomination committee applied these criteria, and they tried to do a good job, you know, tried to stick to the word. Maybe this is also something that is US specific, you know. I feel that in the US, people try to comply to the word of the law, you know. Elsewhere, like in Germany, we think, okay, what is the purpose of that, and then we act accordingly, even if it's against the law and the writing. So I saw this difference. We just do things if it still achieves the purpose, you know. And I think this is missing in the culture of PMI. So this might be one thing, but I'm a little bit distracting. So I really want to focus on these criteria, and really I want to suggest that maybe people who are interested, you know, we go on and try to research about criteria, not only in PMI, you know, elsewhere, you know, what are the criteria, and do we find some biases in there inherent?
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, the other thing I'll offer, you know, I teach the lean startup methodology at the business school, and at the heart of that is doing the customer research, right? So really doing customer interviews and understanding people's past decisions and motivations. And it could be quite interesting to do that with the candidates, right? With people like, why did you apply? What made you want to apply? Or why didn't you apply? And then maybe delving in with the selection committee, just staying very curious and understanding, you know, what was the criteria. And of course, there's all that sort of interesting research also coming out about blind criteria, right? Like having musicians try out behind a black curtain. They even take their shoes off so you can't hear the tick, tick, tick of high heels or the heavy steps of men. So that when musicians are trying out for the highest level orchestras, they are just exclusively being assessed on their abilities, and that we see the same thing with CVs, you know, remove anything gender identifying or racial identifying information, and the outcomes can be quite different. So I feel like that data is useful for us, and so, you know, maybe being curious. And something I can include in the chat box, you know, I think there's these stages around, and again, let me be the first to say that I'm on a journey myself to understand my biases and my unconscious biases and how that plays out in my work, and how to stay curious and humble, because, you know, it can be very difficult, particularly if I'm tired or I have a lot of work to do. You know, I have to really work at staying curious and staying humble and staying open. But I do think that this awareness piece is very useful, right? It can be quite eye-opening. And there's just like a short self-administered survey, which I was with a group that was using recently. So I'll put it in the chat box because it's sort of quite useful, I think, to just have like a little insight in a self-administered survey about where our biases might be.
Thank you.
Hi. Would it be possible for me to comment on the topic that we're on before we move on?
Or Pam, yes.
Hi, everyone. My name is Pam Luck. I'm a project manager based in San Francisco, California, and I've worked in and around IT most of my life, just to tell you where I come from. A couple of interesting things around what we're just talking about. You're absolutely correct, Fiona, around women wanting to be perfectionists and having most of the criteria before applying for a job, whereas men don't feel that same need. But there is new data as well that shows that we are also assessed differently. So even if I get over my need to have 80% of the requirements, men are assessed on potential to do a role, and women are assessed on their ability to do the role today. So it goes above and beyond, whereas we are asked again and again to make adjustments. There are also adjustments in terms of how we're being assessed for a role when we're being assessed against other candidates. So it's a yes and in terms of making adjustments, but also how are we assessing people that are coming into that space. And I would also say from a PMI perspective, I think, you know, we found that most of the time when you involve diversity early in a process, that's how you catch things. So it's putting together working groups, it's looking at the criteria that you're establishing for how you're looking at different candidates. And I will also say, as someone who's worked in IT for 20 plus years, being the first female and being alone is hard. So you have to know what you're facing. And a lot of times, a lot of us are like, you know, I've played that role. I've been the first female leader in this organization. I've been the first IT person to come into this space. And you're being the first carries with it a certain set of challenges that you're sort of signing up for. And you also in some way know it's going to limit your ability to accomplish other things, because you now are the single representative for your gender, for your age, for your community. And that brings with it a lot more. So yes, we have to ask women to get involved. Yes, we have to invite them to the table, but you also have to understand the burden that they have just decided to take on. And that impacts their job, that impacts their family, that impacts their career perspectives. They've just committed to something that's probably going to suck a lot of energy and time above and beyond what it would have. And so how do we recognize and understand when we're asking women to continually step in and be first and sort of do that and try to move it for the next generation that comes behind, right? And that's something, I'm a Gen Xer, so I'm coming up on 50. So this is something that I have to think about. You know, there's a lot I still want to do and changes that I want to make for my own, you know, self, but also how do I also balance that against, you know, opening doors for the women coming behind me. So, and I wanted to throw that out. So thank you.
And those are such critical points. And Antonio, I wonder, I think also what I'm hearing, part of what you're talking about is just the importance of allyship. And some of the other research we've seen is that being an ally can count against you, right? Like number one, women and people of color, for example, who get tapped to do a lot of education work, that's not really valued as other activities are that contribute to the P&L. We also see that for men who step forward who are allies, there can be some backlash against that. So I was kind of also curious on that point when we were hearing from our colleague a moment ago, who is stepping forward, Thomas, who was, you know, stepping forward and saying he's really wanting to be an ally, kind of, you know, how's that going for you? Obviously, the more powerful and the greater your prestige and security of your position, the easier it is to be an ally. But all that to say, Antonio, I wonder if we might hear from others on the call about ways that they are being allies on this topic of diverse leadership and what lessons they're learning that we might all benefit from.
Sure. I think there's a related question from Andre from Brazil, more around the bias, but maybe you can connect the two. Andre, do you want to give it a try? And then I'll have James and Paula as well. They have some thoughts to share.
Yeah, we are talking about bias and on the human side, but they are improving the technology toward artificial intelligence. And the bias may improve or reduce the bias through the artificial intelligence. What do you think? This technology will be beneficial or not so good for the actual situation of the diversity and minorities?
If that question was for me, would you mind repeating it one more time?
Yeah. We are talking about bias in the diversity and minority, and are moving toward artificial intelligence, the technology of artificial intelligence. And we are reading a lot of articles saying that the bias continues in the artificial intelligence. What do you think? It will be, how are you going to solve this situation? What do you think?
I think it's a really important point that you're raising, Andre. And I would go to Pam's point about the importance of having diversity built in from the beginning. And also, Pam, you being in the tech sector, you may have more to add here. But maybe, Andre, we've been reading similar articles where we see it's a lot of young white men who are involved in the design of the AI. So that seems like it could benefit from diversity. And in the same way that research subjects tend to be of white men, I guess, Pam, what are you seeing in the tech sector about how involving diverse people in the design of technology makes a difference in the results and how that technology serves us.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the challenge is AI learns right through, and I don't know a ton about AI, but I will say, you know, anything that has to learn based on the existing body of knowledge, there's biases in what we use as our existing body of knowledge, going all the way back to color film from Kodak, right? That was built and developed around a white skin tone. And the same, you know, for apps that you build that can look and find a person's face were developed against a Caucasian skin tone, and they don't work as well for brown and black people. So we have technologies and things that are already with built-in biases. A lot of if you look at history books, if you're using scanning through historical documents, scanning through text that exists, how are you looking at the biases that are built into your base that you're starting from? I mean, I think there was an experiment that Microsoft or someone did around building, you know, using AI to generate tweets, and it went racist so fast they had to shut it down. That's because of what body of knowledge they're using as source. So I think it's gonna have to be the kind of thing where we look at how do we undo some of the biases that are already built into the technologies and things that we use today. And if we can't do that, there has to be some real thinking around how do we compensate for that. That's at least where and again, this is not my area of expertise, but that's what makes sense in terms of how I start thinking about it.
Yeah, right on. Antonio, I wonder if we could hear from our colleagues of color who are on the call. We'd just love to hear them weigh in as well.
There is Diana. Paula had also a comment she wanted to mention. So maybe Diana go first, then Paula.
First of all, Fiona, thank you so much. I wasn't aware that this was going to be the subject matter, but it is very timely, especially given what's going on in the world. I think that this is not only timely, but what it does, I think the very, very core of it is biases that we have, but we just assume that we don't. And I've seen that even with myself, even recently, having to change my own thinking and acceptances around other groups. And I thought that I was tolerant, but even that word is improper. Tolerant of what? But I know that unless we, with the given dynamics going on in the world and experts like yourself giving us something to think about, it actually starts with what we accept, what realities we accept. Do we accept that leadership looks like white male? Do we, and when we accept that, are we aware that those are the acceptances that we have? And are we aware of the background and the conditioning that we grew up in and those situations that help to shape our biases, even though we're well-intentioned?
Thank you. Thank you, Diana.
Mm-hmm.
Paula, you want to talk about your views?
Hi, everyone. It's nice to be back. There is a solution that I've come across. Actually, it was proposed by someone who's an ex-Western alum from my university. She set up this organization, this NGO called Girls on Boards originally. Boards meaning boards of directors. And it's actually girls20.org. And I can put that in the chat for everyone to see. It's basically an opportunity, an early opportunity for women, young women, to get a foot into boards of directors, sort of like an apprenticeship or like you know, a fly on the wall type of participation, but still with some active participation, and it requires an application process. But what different boards of directors can do is sign up their boards if they're interested in further inclusivity on their boards of directors. So that may be something that PMI might be interested in, or other organizations that have boards that are looking at expanding their diversity. So specifically for women, young women, regardless of where they're originally from or what their background is. It's an excellent way for young women to start to feel what it's like to break past that glass ceiling, and experience what it would feel like, and have that experience of making decisions from a board of directors perspective. So that's just another example of a solution that's already been thought of, and that young women can apply. And I don't know that there is a lot of knowledge about this program, but I'll pop it into the chat box so everybody can have a look. And then definitely would encourage you to participate in this program, because if you are on a board of directors, board of directors for an organization, whatever the organization is, and you feel like you have some inclusivity challenges and you'd like to give an opportunity for some young women to get a leg up, so to speak, from a director perspective, and to learn what leadership looks like from the perspective of boards of directors. This is an excellent opportunity that you can, and it doesn't cost you anything to join, so it's definitely worthwhile.
Thank you, Paula. Very interesting. I will take note of all these things. Thank you, Fiona, also for moving the chat and replying to James and Ian. So I will copy that and share that later. I think, unfortunately, we're coming to the end of the call. It just flies time so quickly. I would spend more time with you, Fiona, but we are all jumping from Zoom to Zoom. And I wanted to leave a few minutes to, if you want to wrap it up. From my side, I just find this topic so relevant, and we know so little, and the more we can help and work together, the better world we'll create. So, Fiona, you want to say a final comments?
Thanks, Antonio. Well, firstly, what a rich discussion. Thank you for convening us. And this is a tremendous group of people. I mean, people's attention and their thoughtful questions and chiming in has been really fascinating for me. I think I'm glad that we have touched on this topic of allyship. It's a powerful, I mean, truly, in the true sense, a powerful community that you've created here, Antonio. And this community, each person has this ability to use their power to extend a platform and opportunity for others who might not otherwise have it. Maybe because of age, maybe because they have a low-income background, maybe because of the color of their skin. Maybe they didn't get educated at a great school, the country they're from, right? There's all these things. And for us to be where we are, we know we're lucky, right? We know we've worked hard. We also know we're lucky. So as I sort of encourage myself each week, just think about how I can use my power to help others. And sometimes it's a very small thing that I do, like a key introduction or a key piece of advice, can actually go an incredibly long way. And I'm sure we've all benefited from those little small things that have been small actions, small amounts of time that others have done that have made a big difference for us. And so whether it's small or big, I think this is a community that can use its power for a lot of good.
Thank you very much, Fiona, and I'm sure we'll be in touch again, and hopefully we find some synergies and we can help you to bring these opportunities. I think this is something that it got mark on me, is how to bring people the opportunities, and we can bring projects as opportunities for your community and see if we can connect that and make a more diverse world. So thank you again, Fiona. Thank you everybody for being again on this Thursday call. It's so rich, and it just flies time very quickly. And just keep well, and looking forward seeing you again. Fiona, I'll share your details if you don't mind. I'm sure people will reach out. I will share your Congress in October, I think is the summit. So I'll share all these details, and I'm sure you'll hear from members of this community. They're very active.
That would be wonderful. Antonio, thanks so much for inviting me today. I really appreciate it. Very open to any collaboration.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.